So today's episode, we've got a fantastic author, David E Feldman, who most notably is known for his Dora Ellison Mystery Series books, but he has got other books and ghostwrited many other books as well. Outside of this, he plays piano pretty much professionally and does this in assisted living homes. So thank you very much for being on the show, David.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So if you just want to explain to the guests a bit about you and the books that you've written and essentially what you're trying to get across to the readers.
Sure. Thank you. As you say, I've written the Dora Ellison Mystery Series, which is 6 books, really 7 books, because there's a prequel, which is free on my website so far. And the sixth book 6, which is really the 7th book, not to be confusing, comes out on my birthday, February 21st. So that's a mystery series, and it stars a female couple who are both detectives and lovers. I've also written a book called The Neighborhood, which is a standalone novel about the town I grew up in, Valley Stream, New York, which in the 70s, when I was growing up there, was 100% white. And the book is about 4 families who lived there, one of whom is the first family of color to move to the town, and what happens when they move to the town. So it's a book about racism and really transcending, I should say, racism. Many of my books are about transcending issues and dealing with challenging issues. I've myself have been through some really rough health issues. I had cancer last year. I've had addiction issues and depression, and here I am, and so I give some of those challenges to my characters and watch them work it out, and they help me work it out, and I help them work it out. It's kind of a two-way street with my books.
I was going to say that. Is that something that's really helped you to, when you are writing, it helps you to not only write the stories and make them interesting through overcoming challenges, etc., but also to, as you said, help with your own life? Because I know when I wrote a few books as well, or wrote a book with the second on its way as well, and you surprise yourself with how much you learn about not only yourself but other things as well. You feel that that's really helped in terms of your writing style and also the content within the books as well?
It's 100% true. I didn't set out to do that with my writing. I fell in love with writing as a reader growing up. I was a bit of a troublemaker, and I didn't go to school very much. I cut school, and I went to shoot pool and play pinball. Was a big deal back then in the 70s. And I didn't go to school as much as I should, but I loved to read. I always loved to read, and I fell in love with certain authors. First science fiction, and then John Steinbeck, and all kinds of things. Kurt Vonnegut. And I wanted to become a writer, so I didn't set out to deal with personal issues or political or social issues, for that matter, which are in my books as well. That just sort of happened, and I suppose it happened as I ran into some of these issues in my own life and in my family's lives. They started to show up in my books, and I gave them to my characters, and you know. In a way, my characters seem to write themselves. I didn't set out to write a mystery series about 2 women who are in love. I just set out to write a mystery series, and then these women showed up, and in a way, they tell me what to write. It's sort of a mysterious process.
Yeah, I think with murder mystery books especially, they are quite complicated, aren't they? In terms of you are setting red herrings up, you've got different character arcs, and you need to make it engaging for the readers. How did you go about doing that? Did you reverse engineer the storyline? Is it something that you sort of ad-libbed to an extent? How did you go about doing that?
It's a great question. So one of the things I did along the way is, as I said, I read a lot, and as a child, I read science fiction and John Steinbeck, and then in more recent years, I read a lot of mysteries, and I fell in love, for instance, with Lee Child and his Jack Reacher books, and the way I don't think I knew what I was doing at first. I read some books about writing mysteries, and that helped to some extent. And then I just set about writing them. And what I do typically is I start with the murder. And these are usually murder mysteries. Some mysteries are about thefts or all sorts of other crimes. Mine are about murders of some one sort or another, and I start with what's the crime and who did it, and why did they do it? Because I think those really root the story, and then I take a look at how will the detectives approach the story? Who is investigating the story? In my first book, Dora Ellison, who's my main character, is not the person investigating the murder. She is in love with a police lieutenant named Francesca or Franny Hart. And Franny Hart is getting phone calls from a disguised voice saying, you've got to look into this quote unquote murder that wasn't a murder. And Franny Hart looks into it, and she is in love with Dora. That's the love interest, and Dora is a garbage collector. But something happens to Franny, and that sets Dora in motion. And she doesn't decide. She's compelled to look into what happened and avenge what happened to Franny. I'm kind of maybe saying too much here, but so I start with the murder. I then move to who is investigating it. And then I do, as you say, have to start laying out red herrings, false clues, and lead the reader in all sorts of directions early in the book, and then lead the reader into some false direction later in the book that seems like it's going to be the main solution, but typically isn't. And there have to be some big surprises and twists along the way.
Yeah, I mean, for me, as you said there, with regards to red herrings and twists, etc. For me, the best films, and this isn't always the case, but those that keep me most compelled to continue to watch or continue to read, are those that have psychological elements that keep you interested, that keep you excited, that ensure that you're not too sure as to which way the story is going to go next. And I think that with murder mysteries and that type of genre, it is definitely something that grasps the attention of the readers. How did you utilize the main character to ensure that that continues to be the case throughout the 6-book series? Because at the end of the day, it's easy to, well, not easy to write a book. It's easier to write a book. It's more difficult to write 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 books that are part of the same series of novels. How did you manage to create a strong character? Because I think it's always important to do that, and also keep the arc consistent throughout the books.
Sure. Well, so I did a few things. I think it's very easy to create a kind of Sir Galahad sort of, or a female version of Sir Galahad, who is kind of a white knight kind of character, who is all good and no bad and doesn't have any faults. But that's not so interesting. So what I did was I created a damaged main character. Dora Ellison is someone who grew up around abuse. She witnessed her father beating up her mother, and she tried to stop him, but she couldn't stop him because she was a little girl, So she has that kind of in the back of her mind and deep in her soul all the time. And what that's done is it's fueled a kind of rage against bullies. She runs into bullies in every book. Kind of minor bullies early in every book, and major bullies, the book's major villain later on in every book. And she teaches them a lesson. And I think none of us likes bullies. I think even bullies don't realize that they're being bullies. And whether we are being cut off in our car on the road, on the street, or someone's taking our parking spot, or they have too many items on the express line in the supermarket. We don't like it when people do things that aren't fair. And maybe in the back of our minds, for many of us, we'd like to do something about it. But of course, we live in a society that has laws and police and so forth. And we've grown up and been taught not to do, not to just punch someone in the face because we think they're doing the wrong thing. Well, Dora isn't bound by those sorts of things. I mean, she's bound by laws, of course. And she does something about bullies when she runs into them. So I think that makes for an interesting main character who does various things during all the books. And what I've done, you asked what I've done to sustain the arc. So there's a few things there. Dora is in love with Franny Hart, and as the book goes along, Franny's no longer really part of the story by the end of book one, and she runs into a librarian named Missy Winters. Missy, and by the way, I'm a big fan of librarians. I'm a big fan of books. And I don't know how it is in the UK, but in the US, libraries really level the playing field between the rich and the poor in terms of access to information. You can go to your library and you go to your library online and research information via databases. And my advanced degree, is a master's degree in library science. So I'm a big fan of librarians. And Missy Winters becomes sort of the Watson to Dora's Sherlock Holmes, or maybe it's even the reverse. I don't know. But Missy Winters seeks out and finds and develops theories and information about the crimes. And so that relation, and she slowly falls in love with Dora and vice versa. And that happens over the course of several books. So the arcs, as you say, develop. We have arcs that are within each book, but we have arcs that are between the books. And I also have a cast of other characters who come together and fall apart and live and die, and some have addiction issues. I'm sober many years, and I have characters, several, a father and son, who have alcohol and drug issues. Sorry, and they struggle with those issues, in between the books and over the course of many books.
Yeah, I think it's very important to make it realistic in terms of it. When there's challenges. You mentioned it earlier on, through that part, that Dora stands up to bullies, and then she stands up to sort of the big general at the end. With regards to video games and in people's own lives, they have to take challenges and steps, don't they? They have to first start going to the gym, then they have to set new goals. And it sounds to me like with Dora especially, she is taking on challenges within each book and long term that ensure that she develops as an individual. And I think that's quite important to make it relevant to the readers, because everyone in their own life is going through something that they want to overcome, and it's nice to have a character that people can relate to. Do you think that there is other characters within the book as well that have relative actions that would fall in line with the readers, or is it mainly Dora in this example?
Well, I would say it's Dora more than anyone else. Dora finds out in book one that she's a natural at mixed martial arts. I'm a big fan of martial arts, and I did a little bit of martial arts in the 90s, and I did a bit of boxing before that. And I'm a fan of contact sports, and I follow them. And she follows them. And at first, that's all that happens, is she follows them. And Franny says to her lover, Franny says, you love them so much, there's a league forming. Why don't you go down to the league and check it out for yourself? Because Dora, because she is a garbage collector, she's immensely strong, from picking up these big garbage bins and flipping them over into the back of the truck. She's very, very physically strong. That's a hard job, being a garbage collector. And she does go down and to this league that's forming, and she beats everyone, even the instructor, and she becomes an instructor there. And it's something that comes up in every book. And late in book one, she finds herself face to face with this killer, and he says, with martial arts is only going to take you so far. This is the real deal. And she deals with that. She figures out what she can do because she's not in the cage. She's not in a boxing ring. On the street, if you're fighting for your life, there are things you can do that are not allowed in martial arts, and she's perfectly fine with doing them. But she also, to your point, she suffers the consequence. Something that I'm writing right now. I'm writing book 6. Book 5 is coming out on my birthday, February 21st. And all of these books, by the way, can be found either on Amazon or davidefeldman.com, my website. She runs into a villain who is pretty much her equal in book 4. Book 5. At the end of book 5, and she has a very hard time, and she's in bad shape at the end of the book. And early in book 6, which I'm writing right now, I'm just starting it right now, she's dealing with, and Missy is helping her deal with the trauma. I mean, if you got into a real life or death fight on the street, as fun as that might be in a video game or in a movie or even in a book, there's trauma that comes from these things, and she grew up with trauma, and now she's suffering the trauma of this very violent altercation that occurs at the end of the previous book. And so now in the next book, she's dealing with the trauma, and Missy is helping her cope, kind of nursing her through the trauma. And so I like to have these things ring true in a sense. It's all well and good for Jack Reacher to to have a knockdown, drag out fight with 7 guys in a book, all of whom are trained in martial arts, and they're all huge, and he beats the hell out of all of them, and he does get kicked around, but he's going to, if we're going to be true to life, suffer some consequences. And actually Lee Child does write that in his books. Jack Reacher does have scars from shrapnel, and he does have broken ribs from time to time. So I think that's important to include in a book, because it's what we would expect in real life. And I think connecting to characters' pain is a great way to connect readers to characters in an ongoing way.
Yeah, I think it's good that when you have got a hero or a heroine that is the protagonist of a book or a film or any story for that matter, it's good that they have flaws and they aren't invincible. Because I think, as you said there, with regards to the trauma, it's very difficult to respect a storyline where there's no issues with the protagonist. The protagonist, just everything goes swimmingly. There's no issues. There's no divorces. There's no injuries. There's no trauma. There's no adversity at all. And I think from what you're saying is that helps keep the book human to an extent.
Absolutely. Yeah, it does. And I also add in other things that keep the book human. One of the bullies she runs into, I think it's in book 3, is she's driving along with Missy, and she sees a guy who's beating his dog, and she pulls over, jumps out of the car, teaches the guy a lesson physically, beats the guy up, and takes the dog. And I'm a big fan of dogs. I have actually during COVID got my first dog, and my wife and my children's first dog ever, but my first dog in 50 years. And we're in love with this dog, and lots of people are in love with their dogs. Who loves you more than your dog? So Dora and Missy are dog people, and Dora has this dog, and when she's hurting, the dogs nurture her. The dogs are very loving, and they're aware of her pain, and that's something that's part of life. So I try to add, I try to build relationships around pain and around challenges in life that really reflect things that'll occur in my readers' lives as well.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, dogs, absolutely. Everyone loves dogs, don't they? They're fantastic. I've got a boxer myself. What breed have you got?
I've got a Yorkie.
Yorkie Terrier.
Yeah. He's wonderful. And he thinks he's the mayor, and he thinks he's a big shot. He thinks he's a tough cookie, but then he'll see a shadow, or he'll see someone out on the street. My neighbor will come out the front door, and he'll go running into the house. And he'll go hide. So he's an interesting character. But we're absolutely in love with him. And actually, one of the dogs in the book, my Yorkie is called a chocolate Yorkie because he's brown, and Missy's dog is a chocolate Yorkie called Comfort because he really is a comfort. And I really have my dog Boo Bear's personality reflected in Comfort.
So, in terms of your readers, then, what is your major demographic in terms of murder mysteries? Generally, it's generally seen that they are for people with high IQ or require high stimulation because the stories themselves can be quite complex. It's not like, Bill walks down the shop or walks to the shop, gets himself a can of soda or Coke and walks back. It's a much more complicated and intricate design. So, can you just talk a little bit, excuse me, a little bit about your demographic, both ideal demographic and actually the demographic of people who actually purchase and read your books?
Yeah, that's a great question too. It was not my intent to start out writing for anyone in particular. I've been reading murder mysteries. I'm in my 60s, and I've been reading them since I was in my 30s. And I'm male, and I'm not a person of color, and so I had intended to write them for just about everyone. And I've written characters who are all sorts of people. I have many people who have many different backgrounds, who are Latinx, who are Black, who are from the islands. I have a woman who becomes the mayor of the city, which is a reflection of my own city, Long Beach. Their city is called Beach City, who is a devout evangelical Christian and has certain ideas that you'll find that many evangelical Christians have, and I love her, and she behaves in the ways you might expect someone with those beliefs to behave. So I didn't set out to write for any demographic, but of course my books are read more by certain groups of people than others, and I can see that when I run Facebook ads. Facebook will tell me who is reading the books. And what I have found is that far and away, most of my readers tend to be older women. I don't know why that is. I just don't know. Maybe because younger women are doing other things, and men are doing other things, or maybe they like different sorts of books, and maybe other mystery. Maybe Jack Reacher's, Lee Child's Jack Reacher books are read by more men. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. To me, that's a mystery. But I do find that my books tend to be read more by older women, particularly women in their 60s or 50 and over, and even 60 and older. It's a big difference in demographics. At least that's who's clicking on my ads on Facebook. In terms of who's actually reading the books, I don't really know, but that's my window into that information.
Do you think that maybe it's down to the protagonist being female as well?
Might be. It might be. I had sort of assumed that I might have readers who might be gay, because my main characters are lesbian. I don't know, and I sort of wondered, well, I was a little concerned that I'm writing about characters who are of all sorts of demographics, and I was a little concerned that people from those demographics, who are of those demographics themselves, might say, well, gee, how can you write about a gay woman? You're not a gay woman. You're an aging white guy, or I have in book 2, the majority of my characters, at least the ones surrounding the mystery in book 2, I still have Dora and Missy, but the people involved in the mystery are Black, and would some folks who are Black say, well, gee, you're a white guy, how can you write about Black people? And my answer to all of that is, I don't write about Black people or gay people. I write about people. I write about people, and people are people. We all have feelings. We all I'm not writing from a historical perspective at all. I can't. That I cannot do. I did. I was not involved in certain kinds of protests for certain kinds of issues. I'm not of a certain demographic, but I do have a lot of compassion, and I do my best to write each person as an individual human being and not necessarily as a member of a particular demographic, even though they might actually be Black. So I do my best to be careful and compassionate, when it comes to writing the different people.
Yeah, I just think that you don't have to be of a certain race, religion, creed to be able to maybe understand how they would think. That's the whole point in being empathetic as human beings, isn't it? We can understand how kids feel, we can understand how certain groups feel, and we can understand how other genders, the other gender will feel. So I don't think that you necessarily have to be that specific person to be able to write about that person, because otherwise J.K. Rowling would, how would she be able to write about wizards and witches, because she's not one. So
that's right. And she has an imagination. I have an imagination. My books would be pretty boring if I was only writing about 65-year-old white guys in, Long Island, New York. It would be, it would be silly. It would be very constricting for me. That's for sure. And for me, the great thing about writing is I get to do anything and go anywhere and travel places. I do a bit of research, and then I do the best I can to write creatively and in a way that's fun to read about all sorts of people. So yes, I think we're free to use our imaginations. God gave us imaginations, and we're here to use them. I also write about social issues. I do have addiction comes up quite a lot in my books because it's something that I have had be a part of my life. In one book, the focus is on people who identify as various genders or non-binary. I have, that's an issue. Issues that are in the news typically crop up in my books, but not necessarily in ways that you would expect. You may think that a person who has this background would react to that issue in a certain way, but it's not necessarily the case. People are more complicated than we give them credit for, and people have all sorts of views, and I find that to be interesting. Although I don't have much in the way of actual politics in my book, but I have issues that come up in the daily course and in the course of the arc of the story. I have all sorts of issues that come up and are dealt with by different characters.
So in terms of your new book then that's coming out in roughly a month's time, is it A Divisive Storm?
I'm sorry?
Is your new book that's coming out next month A Divisive Storm?
No, that's the book I'm writing now.
Okay.
No, the book, so I'll tell you a little bit about it. Book 5, book 6 will be A Divisive Storm. Okay. Although, as I say, it could be a little confusing because I have a prequel called Storm Warnings. Book 5 is A Special Storm. And what happens in A Special Storm is this: a performance of a troupe of young people who are singers and doing a performance in front of an audience. They're a troupe of young people with special needs, and they are backing one of their own who is a beloved singer, a brilliant singer who happens to have cerebral palsy, named Julian Lockhart. And he's singing a particular song, and as he gets to the high point, the apex of the song, he pauses, and a crack is heard, and blood starts to spurt out of his neck, and he falls to the stage. Pandemonium and panic ensue, and the boy's father hires Geller Investigations, which is where Dora and Missy work, to find his son's killer. So we ask ourselves, who would kill this beautiful and talented young man with special needs who has the voice of an angel? So that's what's going on in book 5. And we meet a bunch of young people who have special needs. And, as I say, I have issues that come up, all sorts of issues that come up in all of my books. And in this book, I it's the issue of people with special needs and who's going to care for them after their parents are gone is something that's important in my life. My brother Matt has a daughter, my niece Zoe, who has special needs, and she needs care around the clock. She's 24, and she's a little girl. She's about the size of a 10-year-old, I would say, and she will need care forever. She doesn't walk. She can walk a bit with the aid of a device. She doesn't speak. She can't see to her physical needs at all, and she'll need care forever. So what'll happen to her when my brother's gone? After my family are gone, and that's an issue that's important in my life and in my family's life. So that comes up in the book. Also, in terms of when we think about people with special needs, we may tend to look at them, or some people may tend to look at them with pity and say, look at that poor person, and think of them as less. And I don't think of them that way. In a way, and I say this in the book, I have characters who point this out. Maybe they're more, because who has my niece Zoe ever hurt? She's never called anyone a bad name. She's never hurt anybody's feelings. She listens to music and she laughs. That's what she does. And she can laugh for 3 or 4 hours. She can just find something funny. We don't know what it is. She'll just start laughing, and her whole body is shaking, and she's laughing and laughing and laughing for hours. And pretty soon we're all laughing. So I do have scenes where there's a group of people with special needs in the book, and they're just, my intent with these scenes is that they're just delightful. They're just wonderful people to be around. They're cheerful and they're happy. Sometimes they're not so cheerful, happy, but for the most part they are, and they don't hurt anybody. And so that's one of the things I try to point out in the book. And of course, who would want to kill one of them is also an issue in the book. And that this person who is behind this murder has just got to be an awful person to want to hurt these blameless people who are just doing their best to stay alive.
Yeah, definitely. I think with people who are disabled in some respect, and those that are maybe more simple, they have a level of sort of love for life that normal people don't. It's very difficult to put your finger on as to why that might be. But Dostoevsky said something similar, that a lot of people have great sadness with life because they know too much or they're too aware of things. Whereas when you're quite simple in nature, as you said, you can laugh for 3 or 4 hours. And I think that's something that's very endearing to those people. How long do you feel that this Dora series will go on for? Have you got an end date in mind, or is it a case of going indefinitely? And then a spin-off question to that as well is that you're not just known for your Dora series. You have got other books as well. So if you'd like to talk a little bit about those as well after you've sort of summarized when you expect the Dora series to end, if at all.
Yeah, I plan to write quite a few more Dora books. I like the fact that people are doing read through, which means they read the first book. By the way, book 1 is called Not Today, and Dora Ellison Mystery Book 1, and it's free. You go to Amazon and you can download the book. Just get the book. And my hope is that people will read this book and want to read book 2 and book 3 and book 4. And they're all very inexpensive anyway. They're $3.99 in the US. I don't know what that is with quid, but it's somewhere in that ballpark. It's a low number. So I plan to write quite a few more, and I plan also to write a spin-off series about Adam Geller, who owns the Geller Investigations company. He's the owner. He has the private investigator license. Dora and Missy don't, and they need to work under someone who does have the license, and so Adam does. And he's a guy who's very close to my demographic and has gone through some of the things that I've gone through in terms of health, and he goes through them with humor, and he laughs at his frailties. And I think that would be somewhat of a humorous series. There are some mystery authors, Harlan Coben is an example, who write separate mystery series and make them humorous. He writes Harlan and his friend, and they solve mysteries, and those are humorous mysteries. So I plan to write more Dora Ellison mysteries. I hope to write this Adam Geller mystery series, and we'll see what the characters say about continuing them. Yes, I do write other books, and my book, The Neighborhood, as I was saying at the beginning of our talk, came out in November 23rd or 24th, was when The Neighborhood came out. And it's about racism, and it's about the town I grew up in. And it was written up in several of the local newspapers, the newspapers in the towns that I talk about. Thought they would, write a little bit about the book. I'm also writing a book called Percival. I'm writing that now. My father, it's more or less about my father. My father's gone now, but he had polio at the age of 2, and he was extremely handicapped and disabled much of his life. They used to, they didn't use the phrase physically challenged when he was growing up. They said crippled. And it's really not a very nice term nowadays. Say, oh, he's a cripple. People don't speak that way unless they're not being nice. But he overcame really a very difficult challenge. And he had many, many surgeries growing up. They were paid for by a U.S. charity called the March of Dimes, who I'm a big fan of. And he became a musician. They were very, very poor. He lived in a very poor section of Brooklyn, New York, called Bedford-Stuyvesant, which is known as a not a very nice place to live. And his mother somehow scraped together money to give all the kids, there were 5 kids, to give them music lessons, and 4 of them became really fine musicians, and my father was one of them. So I'm writing a book about essentially about my father. It's fiction, and his name was Lawrence, but this is about Percival. And I had to make it fiction because I can't presume to know everything about what my father was thinking and what his family did when he was young. And there's a lot of facts that I don't have. So I'm making a lot of it up, and I'm doing the best I can to keep it close to his life. But it's a tribute really to my father, who was really quite a man. And he passed on his love of music, of course, to myself and to my brother and sister. All of us are musicians and singers and so forth. So those are the books I've written. I wrote also a book called How to Be Happy in Your Marriage, which is a roadmap to having gratitude for our partners. And I'd be happy to talk about any of those in any way that strikes your fancy.
Sounds to me like you've got a lot of books that are all very different to an extent. How do you remember all the characters, all the character traits? Because you've obviously named a lot of different characters over the conversation so far. How do you keep memory of that? Is it just because you've written so deeply about these characters that it's ingrained within you, or is it something that you have to revisit sometimes to keep on top of things?
Great question. So it's a combination of things. I keep a lot of notes. Each book has a different folder on my computer. I use computers, and I have been for many years. And I keep notes that are 2 sets of notes for each book. One is my story notes, and the other is character notes. So in one, I use a 3-act structure, where we have something called the inciting incident, which is the thing that gets the ball rolling. In my mysteries, it's usually the murder. It's always the murder. There's a murder in the first 10 pages or so of the book, and hopefully that grabs the reader and keeps them reading. And so I have one set of notes that's all about what happens in the book, and then I have and has the peaks and the valleys of the the three-act structure, the arcs and the tensions and the I think cliffhangers are very important, leading the reader in one direction and having a reversal and going in the other direction. All that stuff's very important. And I keep track of that with a set of notes in each book about the story. And then I have a separate set of notes that's all about characters. Now, I already know Dora pretty well, and I already know Missy pretty well. And so in my notes, I'll have what's going on with them in this book. So I have Dora in A Divisive Storm I'm writing now is dealing with the trauma of what happened at the end of the previous book, of book 5. She was in a real tough fight at the end of book 5, and it's affecting her. She's having nightmares. She can't sleep. It's very upsetting. And, many of us have these kinds of things, these bombs that go off in our lives. And so I have that in my notes, in my character notes. And then I also have what's going on with all these other characters. And I have, maybe separately, I have lists of some of the other characters. So I keep very copious notes for all the books. And then I have separate little notes for ideas for books that I have for the future that I may or may not get to. If will have to see if I live long enough. I'd like to get to some of these other books. I have an idea for a science fiction book. Maybe I'll write it, maybe I won't. I don't know. But I keep notes, and I keep track of the characters and what's going on with them. And then you know what? I have all of this, and I look at it. I sit down in front of my computer in the morning and the afternoon, and then I go off and I do whatever I'm doing during the day. Or I might work out. I might be on an exercise bike. Currently, I'm rehabbing from a hip replacement. I had my hip replaced in December. And while I'm doing the rest of my life, the ideas will come to me as to what to do next. It came to me, I play music gigs for at restaurants and for seniors. And in November and December, when I was in the run-up to my hip replacement, I couldn't drive to these places. I couldn't carry my equipment. So I hired a young man of Chinese ancestry. His family is from Taiwan. Wonderful young man to help me. I went on Craigslist and I put an ad saying I'm looking for someone to be a roadie. And he has a business. He has plenty of money, but he was a very kind and generous guy, actually a Christian religious guy. To a degree, just a fantastic guy who helped me through driving around and getting me to gigs. Well, that idea kind of came together with my notes from my books. He had some things going on in his life, and I took those, or my subconscious took those and wove some of his issues into, maybe I shouldn't say this, he could see this and sue me, but I don't think he would, but into the story of book 6. I have something going on. Missy happens to have a Chinese background, and some things going on in her life that came to me from this gentleman. And so just things I run into, things I see in the news will just show up in some form in the way that they do for many of us in dreams. Things show up in dreams that are kind of, twisted aspects of reality. And they show up in my books that way too. And I can't really account for how that happens or why. It might be some coping mechanism for me. I don't know what it is, but bit of a roundabout answer to your question. I hope that's okay.
Yeah, it's amazing though, isn't it? How things work out. You speak to a person, they get you in touch with a person, or an idea comes from something, etc. And even dreams, as you said, I tend to have lucid dreams every night before I get up in the morning, where I know I'm dreaming and I can do certain things, and which is good. But I also, as you said, get dreams that help you to get answers and insights into things in your own life. Like, for example, yourself, you've got a very long and detailed process for your books, for your characters, etc. How long does it typically take you to write a book? So, for example, for me, my first book, it took me about a year to write, breaking it down into maybe a page a day, something along those lines, and to ensure it's finished. What about for yourself? What's your sort of process, and how long does it take? Because you've obviously written a lot of books already, so it must be a fairly swift process now. So what does that look like, David?
Fabulous question, because that's changed a lot for me. So there are three books that I wrote that I haven't really talked about at all. That I wrote around the year 2000, 2004, in that period from 1999 to about 2005 or so. I wrote three books, and each of those books took a year. Okay. One was a nonfiction book that was published by a university press in the US, called Pilgrimage from Darkness, which was about a Christian man who grew up in Germany, Nazi Germany, and was in the Hitler Youth and was in the Luftwaffe, a real guy, and eventually became eventually lived in Israel and married a Holocaust survivor. So it's a crazy book, but it took a tremendous amount of research, and that book took at least a year to write and then quite some time to edit. A lot of research, and two other books also. One was a mystery that involving AIDS, which is out of date now, because when I wrote the book, AIDS was a death sentence, and it's not a death sentence now. I know several people who have HIV, they're HIV positive, and they're living with it. They're not dying from it. And another book about my uncle's experiences during World War II, which on the cover of which is a picture of him with Chairman Mao. Sorry. So each of those books took a year.
Yes,
Now,
it sounds same as me then, about 12 months.
well, hang on. So that was then. So what changed for me is that about 2 years ago, I decided to start writing mysteries again. I slowed down my day job, which is I run a marketing company, and I went into semi-retirement, and I started to look around for an agent. And I'm in a bunch of Facebook groups for successful authors, and quite a few people in those groups are independent authors who write and publish their own books. They hire their own editors. They do the whole thing themselves, and they're doing quite well. So I began asking them questions. How are you doing this? And they said, well, there's a bunch of things that they do, but the biggest factor in success is to write a series of books with a lot of books in the series, and then you can get people to read the first book, perhaps for free, which is what I do, and you get read through, and they read through the series. But you got to write a lot of books, and these people were writing 4 or 5 books a year, 4 or 5 books a year. And I thought, well, that's just crazy. So I started down that road, and I began writing my mysteries. Well, I published my book 1 on my mother's birthday, September 14th of 2021. And here we are, January of 2023, and I have book 5 plus a prequel. So really 6 books have come out. So now it takes me about 3.5 months to write a book. Very different, much faster. And I don't know how I'm able to write them so fast, but they just sort of, you know what it is. You've probably heard this. Writing is very much like working out. It's you're working a muscle, and the muscle gets stronger, and you get better at it if you keep doing it. I was a competitive weightlifter in the 1980s. One of my sons is a competitive weightlifter now. If you work at it and you keep at it and you develop a routine and you come up with the best practices and the best training methods you can, and you look at who's doing what and what the successful people are doing, you can do it too. I think people can do just about anything.
100%, 100%, and streamlining processes and getting better at things increases that time as well. And as you said, I've noticed that with my own life, not just in book writing, but with everything. The more you do, the better you get. Then you plateau, and then you obviously get up to the next level as well. So, we've talked a lot about your books and your characters, and the challenges they've overcome. What about in your own life? You talked about a few health challenges over the course of today as well. So, what major challenges have you overcome in your own life, and how do you think that's developed you as an individual, David?
Well, the way it's developed me as an individual is that I'm still alive. I'm just, I've had a crazy 4 or 5 years. So I had drug and alcohol problems as a young person from the early 70s to the early 90s. I was high the whole time. And finally, I hit bottom. One day, I was taking care of my new little son, who was 2 years old in 1992 or 1991. He was born in 1990. I was taking care of my son, and he got hurt. I was high, and he got hurt. And that was it for me. It was over. And I couldn't really stop on my own, but I became willing to do anything to stop. And I think that's what programs that help people with addiction and alcoholism really need. Someone who's really willing to do anything. And I got involved in the sort of programs that help people get clean and sober. And I have been clean and sober for almost 29 years. So that was very challenging, but it's also been incredibly rewarding. It set me on a road toward spirituality and toward believing in a higher power that I call God. I've come to believe in God, and I'm a big fan of God. And I have that argument. You know, Missy and Dora are going to be talking in book 6 about God and how can there be a God? It's crazy. You know, look at how can you have Hitler? How can you have God? So I have that as a question that's discussed. But in the last few years, I've had a whole bunch of surgeries. I had it started small. Each one's gotten worse. I had 4 years ago, I had trigger finger surgery. One of my fingers stayed closed. If I make a fist, all my fingers would open, when I opened the fist, except one of them wouldn't open. And I'm a piano player, so I can't have that. And I had to have surgery for that. And then a few months later, I had a double hernia. And then I needed a hip replacement 2.5 years ago. And then I was playing piano at a steak and sushi joint in Southampton, Long Island, a fancy place. And I started to have trouble playing piano, and I started to stumble when I walked. And I went to see a doctor who said, you need spinal surgery, and you need it soon because you're going to be paralyzed. And that was just awful. And I had spinal surgery, and they did fix that. But 3 days, this is just insane. 3 days later, I got violently sick and started throwing up, like for distance, like exorcist throwing up. And I went to the emergency, and they said, you have air in your intestines, and you need to have a piece of your intestines cut out. It's called an abdominal resection, and you need it right now. And you might wake up with a colostomy bag. And that's exactly what happened. And I did wake up with a colostomy bag, and that was not fun at all. Luckily, they were able to fix that 3 months later in January of 2021. So I had spinal surgery October 8th of 2020. And then October 12th to 13th, I had this abdominal thing where I needed another major surgery 3 days later. And then I had to have that fixed in January. And then I needed another hip replacement in April of last year, 2022. But listen to this. 5 days before the hip replacement in last April, I get a call from my doctor. He says, you got to cancel your hip replacement. You have cancer. And I just was like, oh, and I kind of would look up and I was like, God, what did I do? What did I do wrong? Tell me, I'll fix it. I'll change. Anyway, it was prostate cancer, which is very treatable. And I immediately went to the best cancer hospital that I know of, which is Sloan Kettering in New York City. With the hip or the spinal, I also went to the best hospital I could find, a very well-known hospital here called the Hospital for Special Surgery. So I went to the best, and I'm thankful that we have the kind of insurance here that we do. I'm on Medicare, and I can go anywhere. So I had the cancer treated. I had radiation in September and October of last year. And then I had the other hip replacement that I was waiting for December 7th. And now, God willing, I hope to be okay for a while. I'm going to have my first blood test post-cancer actually on Tuesday, this coming Tuesday. And I am praying for a good result. And I expect a good result because I went to great doctors, and the cancer is very treatable. So I'm hoping for smooth sailing, but I have a lot of material for my characters to suffer through now, because I'm going to give these things to my poor characters who are going to suffer at the hands of my pen or my computer.
I was going to say that literally, that you could write a book about that in terms of, we've overcome this hill. this injury, and then 3 days later I've got an equally bad injury to overcome. And psychologically, that must have been really hard for you. In terms of the drug addiction, etc., I think it's sometimes we need someone to be responsible for in order to give us that accountability that makes us change our decisions and opinions. Like you'll see a lot of the time where single individuals, drinking, drugs, prostitution, etc. But as soon as they have kids, everything changes because they're like, well, I'm responsible for this child now. Do I want these behaviors to be instilled on the child, etc.? And it's sometimes that is what it takes. Like you said, with your son, it took that to change your behavior. God wise, I think there's definitely a creator. I didn't always believe that when I was younger, but if we look at even scientifically, there's the universe, there's stars, there's planets, there's nature, there's DNA. We have limbs and brains and hearts and hips and intestines, yeah, that all have jobs to do. And it's like a design, isn't it? It's like a car and a house. It has a design. So I'm a strong believer that there is a design, and we are self-replicating individuals, different species, etc. Like Ricky Gervais once said that humans invented the dog from obviously a wolf, but we didn't invent a dog. We sort of bred a dog to be the domestic animal it is today. We didn't create it from the ground up with writing the DNA code, genetic code. We are, we can control nature to some extent, but who created the nature in the first place? Where did water come from? The sun, etc. So yeah, I think as you get older, unless you are someone who is not very conscious as a being, you tend to increase your belief in, as you said, a higher power, the creator, the universe, God, whichever of those words you find best placed, really, as you sort of develop. So one final question then, before I let you sort of summarize where people can find you, etc., is what one part, other than your health then, of your life would you want to improve? And then we'll ask a secondary question from that.
Well, you say other than my health. So my health is a big one. But my spirituality, I think it I don't want to come off as someone who's tremendously religious, because I'm not. You mentioned you said something that's so spot on, and I'm married to a scientist. My wife is a scientist. That's her job. She's a senior project scientist at an engineering company, and people, at least in the U.S. and possibly worldwide, might tend to think that scientists don't believe in God, and that the notion of God isn't very scientific. Well, my wife, who's just, I have a wonderful marriage of 36 years. It'll be 36 years this year. Her view is that she does believe in God. And as you say, and as you alluded to, nature, astronomy, the flowers, animals, is evidence of God. It's evidence of God. And I love that. And so I hope to deepen my spirituality. One of the reasons I think that many of us come to believe more in something spiritual, in some kind of, it doesn't have, my father spelled God Mozart. He loved music, and music is what helped him to transcend difficulty. He didn't think of God, he didn't think that way. But I think one of the challenges as we get older, yes, we might tend to believe more in something because we have loved ones. I really learned what love is when I started to have children. I have 2 grown sons, and I love them with a love that I never knew I was capable of. So that's one of the reasons that we may tend to believe more in God. But also, I think as we get older, we get closer to death. And we might tend to be a little more afraid. I certainly am. I'm concerned about dying, and part of that is I've been close to death a bunch of times, and my belief in a higher power or God, and I use the word God, really has showed up for me at very opportune times. When they threw me in an ambulance and said, "We're sending you to have your intestines cut up," in the ambulance, all I could think of, it was surrender to God. This is all in God's hands. Surrender, 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 surrender. Give up the fight. It's all in God's hands. And I said that to the doctor when the surgeon came in. I said, I have faith that God is going to take care of you and you're going to take care of me. And he said, 100%. He was a terrific guy he was a Haitian surgeon who goes to Haiti and does all these surgeries for free in Haiti. He was just a magnificent man. But listen, on some level, all of my stories are about love, about transcendence, about God on some level. It's very different for different people, about hope, about overcoming challenges in modern society and the issues that we face, things that are in the news and not in the news.
Yeah,
Life.
absolutely. I think that, as you said, science does prove God. You know, if you look at gravity, 9.81 Newton meters square, there's other constants. And what science really does is it uses trial and error and experiments to find constants in the universe and say, okay, well, the orbit around the sun is this, the diameter of the Earth is this. And the more science actually understands and finds out, including quantum physics, so the particle slits experiment, quantum entanglement, the more it actually gives, as you said, gives evidence of God. You know, we are now understanding like law of attraction and all those and thoughts of things, because there are things within the space. You know, there is not just visible light, there's infrared, there's ultraviolet. And we only know that they are real because when we put the remote to the TV turns on. But there's actually a ray there. And without science, actually, to deduce and find out these things exist, we wouldn't know they exist. But it proves, really, for me, that God exists. You mentioned death as well. For me, I would say that I'm not necessarily scared of death to an extent, because I think there's really two deaths. Not like, what's his name, John Donaher says, where we were dead before we were born and dead after we were born, in a slightly different context. I think we have two deaths in the way that, obviously, once we're dead, there's a second death in terms of when people forget we ever existed. So Jesus, Muhammad Ali, J.K. Rowling, all of these people, when they're dead, they will leave a legacy that person will be remembered. You know, John Smith down the road probably isn't going to have that second death. As soon as he's dead, his friends might remember him and family for a year or two, and once they've died, that's it. His legacy doesn't pass on. So I would probably say that my fear is more about not leaving a lasting legacy. And look, not everyone can leave a legacy, but it would be nice to leave something where, you know, you feel you made a huge impact on the world. So I think that's, for me, is
I'd like to say something about that. So to me, what you're talking about is love. We live, yes, it's true in books and movies, but I think books and movies are transient, but love is not. And I believe that the person I loved the most before I had children and before I met my wife, none of which was my idea, I had no interest in getting married or having children, God did that for me, I guess, was my grandmother. And my grandmother was the most wonderful, loving person ever for me. And she lives on in the way that you're talking about. She lives in my heart. I did a painting of her. She lives in the heart of all of her grandchildren and their children. You know, my children know about how wonderful my grandma was. And so in that way, that's a way that she does not die. Physically, she was gone in 1980, but she will live in my heart forever. I celebrate her birthday every year, November 29th. My first date with my wife was on November 29th of 1985, and it's a date that's very important to me. But I'd like, if I can tell you one more quick thing. I know our time is very short, but when you talk about God, something I think science hasn't figured out a lot. There's a lot science has not figured out. And one thing science has not figured out was what exactly is the spark of consciousness, self-awareness. Science hasn't figured that out. We can say synapses in the brain, and blah, but we haven't really dissected it. And given that we are conscious and we are self-aware, is it not possible that there is a greater awareness that goes on between us and even beyond us? Because science hasn't figured out consciousness. Maybe there's more about, I think there is much more about consciousness, and that's where we start talking about God. And I think that it is very scientific, and science has just not figured out how to measure it with experiments yet.
Yeah, I mean, we do know that though, really, but inherently and through intuition, we don't need to necessarily prove that on paper because, even before gravity was proven, that it existed, it still existed, didn't it? So I think that when you walk into a room, we get a vibe, don't we? We can feel tension in a room. We get ideas, and where do these ideas come from? Because if we look at ourselves like a radar, like an antenna, are we creating these ideas ourselves, or are we picking up on the ideas that are around in the ether? Because you all know yourself, and I spoke to someone about this the other day. You will have an idea, and a week later you'll see it on TV.
That's right.
You'll see that someone else came up with the idea, and we're like,
right.
So was everyone receiving this idea? And depending on how you acted, would determine the results. I've had that hundreds of times. So for me, we are conscious beings, as you said, but we are picking up on stuff, I feel, as opposed to, creating stuff to some degree. Because where does that come from? As you said, does that come from the synapses, from your amygdala, all this stuff, or is it something that we're receiving from like electrical magnetic waves or
well, God, I read a year or two ago that certain inventions came about and were invented simultaneously and completely on different sides of the world, in Russia and in the UK or in the US, completely separately, no connection to one another. These things were sort of in the air and showed up, and I think another way that spirituality is very measurable is it's been proven, and I've experienced it myself, but it's been proven, I think, scientifically, that prayer works.
Yeah, well, what they say is intuition is God speaking to you, when you get an intuition about something, and prayer is you speaking to God. That's what I've heard, and I think that's a really good way to try and think about it. You're trying to tap into this consciousness, and when you get intuition, it's your consciousness saying, look, something's not right. Your hair stand on end again. Are they antennas? Etc. So I do think there's a lot more to this world than one, we're being told, and two, that we know. Because again, if you look through history, a lot of information was destroyed, and there were things that in history people knew about that maybe we don't know as much today. And yes, they try and leave it through books, as you spoke about leaving a legacy. But if language is lost in that time frame, the translation is lost in that time frame, the actual artifacts are destroyed even minutely, the message doesn't get passed on exactly the same. So even the pyramids, we still don't know to this day how they were built exactly. So yeah, it's about leaving a message and trying to transcend time, really, in terms of the information that we're trying to put forward, essentially. So if you want to tell just sort of to sum up, really, where the listeners can find your books, where they can find a bit more about you, and how they can get in touch with you, essentially.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I answer all of my emails myself in person. I answer every email, assuming I see it. So I can be reached, and my books can be found, and information about me can be found at davidefeldman.com. And my mysteries are there. My other books are there. And I have a mailing list of I don't know, about 1,500 people that I send newsletters to quite often. I recommend other books, other authors. And I'd love to hear from people. I love interacting with people, talking, sharing pictures of our dogs and what music we love and what books we love. So I love interacting with people, and I think it's just wonderful. And Jeevan, I really appreciate this opportunity and have had a wonderful time talking to you.
Thank you very much, David. And one thing I would just add to what you said there is, look, David's first book, Dora series, is free. So even if you go on, you have a look at it, and you don't like it, you've not invested any money. So get on there, have a look at the book. From what David said today, fantastic. Loads of red herrings there. It's going to keep you intrigued. So get on there and at least have a look at the first book. And yeah, looking forward to a new one that's coming out soon. And hopefully for listeners who are already fans of yours, something they've long awaited. So yeah.
Thanks so much. I hope everyone enjoys the books, and I look forward to connecting soon.
Thank you
Thanks.
very much again, David.